dominates our culture, and it affects morality. It affects all the hierarchies of authorities that are established by God in the scriptures. This is not so much a problem in biblical times. It's a major problem in our day and age. And it's a major problem in our day and age because we are in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 and following, and we're in 2 Timothy chapter 3, where men are loved themselves and you have a decaying society. That's where we are. And unfortunately, too many of those people come to your local church. Let's define ethics. To study how we determine good from bad, as well as how to apply our knowledge of the good to our daily actions. That's basically a definition of ethics as the author of the book gives it. To study how we determine good from bad, as well as how to apply our knowledge of the good to our daily actions. Now, we as Christians have a standard. We have a book that gives us the guidelines. But in the culture, there's no such book. You're in the book of Judges where everybody does what's right in their own eyes. And the rules change based on the situation and who it is. We don't have standards that are consistent across the board anymore. We used to have a society like that in America. We no longer have a society like that. And that mindset has infiltrated the church. The Bible doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. Over time, the study of good and bad was divided into two categories. Moral theory, which deals with the philosophical aspects of what it means to be good and do good, and applied ethics, which focuses on the application of moral theory to specific situations. So one is theory, and then the other one is the application of the theory. But if your theory is wrong, your application is going to be wrong. It is in our major cities that we encounter the diversity of thoughts, ethnicity, and religion that creates the need for urban apologetics. If you spend any time in your community, if you spend any time talking to people, everybody's got a different opinion about everything. This religion says this denomination says this group says this ethnic group says this ethnic group says that, this political party says this, that political party says that. And you're bombarded with it 24 hours a day in the media. The TV doesn't go off at midnight anymore. There is a constant bombardment, either through the news channels, through the movies, through the TV shows, through the game shows, whatever, of telling you what you think is good, what you think is right, what you think is bad, and what you think is wrong, and it all depends. Regrettably, even for many Christians, calculating what is right and wrong is based upon the cultural norms that we see practiced by those who possess the most influence rather than Scripture. And who are the people that have the most influence in our culture? What'd you say? Most popular people? Who else? Athletes. Celebrities. Politicians. People have money. Bloggers. Everybody got a podcast. Everybody got a blog. Everybody got input. Intellectualism, the oppressed, the oppressors. We divided them all in these categories. Okay. TV shows, commercials. You see the way commercials are changing our day and age? Not changing, have changed. Have totally redefined family. A culture is formed when people come together in agreement, either intentionally or subconsciously, around a certain philosophy of life and morality. And so we got all these movements, and we got all this and that and that and this and this. And every issue is just as important as every other issue. Save the dog, save the cat, save the polar bear, save the panda bears, save the rainforest, save... Everybody gets saved except people. Because the church is brought into this stuff. And we've gotten away from our main agenda and responsibility and message. And listen, you're bombarded by it every day. If we were to peel back the layers that overlay the choices people make today, we would discover that at the core are the philosophical concepts of postmodernism and relativism. These are the two components that drives most people's way of thinking, or how they determine what's right or what's wrong, what's good or what's bad. So let's talk about what they are. Explain the roles that artists, academians, and we talked about this, media personalities, politicians, the news cycle. I was just listening to a program on my way back here from the gym this evening, and they were talking about, it's wall builders. They were talking about guys who worked in the Trump government, how they would tell the media a word-for-word quote, but when the media wrote it, it looked nothing like the quote they just gave you. Nothing. And so they were asking, were we even in the same meeting? Because it would be totally different than what they were said in the meeting. But it's what's reported to you as news. And you don't know because you wasn't in the meeting. So if they didn't like what was said, they would write what they wanted to be said. So nobody's getting what? The truth of what was said. Everybody's in an uproar over stuff that really wasn't said. Artists. Artists' influence comes as a result of their ability to give voice to movement and modes that are happening at a grassroots level. We really saw this during the 60s, didn't we? And we still see it today. I don't even watch music award shows anymore. Have not for some time. Now I hear about what's going on. I just don't watch it. A couple of years ago, they had Queen Latifah marrying people who were not of the same gender on the award show. Now, what's marriage got to do with an award show?
Communicating your message.
Lil Nas, that crazy stuff he doing. We thought the 70s and 80s was bad. This stuff today is light years from that stuff. I remember back in the 80s when Madonna came out and she sung her song Like a Bird, and she was rolling around on the floor in a wedding dress. And people went crazy. Now they ain't got no dress on. Rolling around on the floor. And it's okay. When Justin Timberlake accidentally pulled off Janet Jackson's top, they went crazy. Now, ain't no top. But artists are communicating the way of the culture. They're communicating, they're influencing people. And people are influenced through the artists and the media and the songwriters. And songwriters in the 60s led many movements from the grassroots, just with their songs. They are like unelected representatives of the people by creatively expressing their generation's inner thoughts. They're saying what they all think. But everybody doesn't have the platform to say it. And they do. And they're influencing people who would never think that way by what they're presenting. Politicians, professors, and media personalities. These people are the power brokers in the community and determine what will be legislated, taught, and celebrated as being morally good. But they're not moral people. Listen, I'm not for people marching on the Capitol and destroying the Capitol. I'm not for any of that. But why we are such an uproar about the Capitol, and they went and tore up the police department, ain't nobody said boo. Ran the policeman out the police department and set it on fire. And nobody says anything. Nobody's arresting anybody. But they're looking for all those people who invaded the Capitol. Because the politicians are determining the agenda. They're determining the message. Yes, sir.
They call the message something other than the message to it. They call it a narrative.
Mm.
So your message is your narrative.
Yeah.
And your message is being communicated in a particular narrative.
Yeah, true. That's very good. That's true. Very good observation. Although categorically different, postmodernism and relativism are knit together by one major common thread. At their roots, they are anti-authoritarian, elevating individualism above all else. The common thread between relativism and postmodernism is their anti-authority. And they elevate the individual and individual wants, desires, dreams, goals, ambitions above everything else. And I'm here to tell you, I didn't need to hear that. I just go back to the garden and find that out in Genesis chapter 3. And it's been a decline ever since then. In practical terms, the relativist argues that ethics are individually determined on the basis of one's circumstance or situation. That's the whole abortion debate. That's the whole euthanasia debate. That's the whole debate, fill in the blank. Relativist argues that ethics are individually determined on the basis of one's circumstance or situation. From a relativistic viewpoint, there are no universal rights and wrongs. No such thing as truth. It just depends.
Depends on who's influencing.
What does it depend on? Well, it depends. Well, what does it depend on if it depends? Well, it depends. We can't make any judgment before the situation because there's no standard of what? Right and wrong. It just
Depends.
It depends whether I got on the left side of the bed or I got on the right side of the bed this morning. Or whether I even got out of bed at all. This is our culture. This is the world. Postmodernists, on the other hand, carry suspicion for authority. They're not necessarily rebellious, they're just suspicious. They don't trust it. They don't trust any authority. Okay. They carry suspicion for the authority figures who oversee the major institutions in our society. Everybody can't be trusted.
Nobody can be trusted.
The only person I trust is myself, and I don't trust myself either. So my question is, If you can't trust yourself, how you know you're right about the other people?
That's right.
But you ain't supposed to ask those kind of questions. You're just supposed to accept what I say and leave me alone.
Oh, absolutely not.
Don't question my response. Don't question my viewpoint. You have yours, I have mine, and we keep it moving. Until I feel like yours invalidates mine. Then we got an issue. It don't make sense, but it's how they think. And our kids in school are being taught to think this way.
This hasn't made sense to them. That's all. It hasn't made sense to them. It doesn't make sense to everybody else.
Thomas Sowell says the biggest problem in our culture is we don't teach people how to think critically. We're not developing critical thinkers. Now, that doesn't mean you criticize everything. It means you're able to think through, to evaluate. The Bible would call it discernment. The biblical word would be discernment. Proverbs would say wisdom. It's not much wisdom. Not much discernment. Not a lot of critical thinking. Thomas Sowell also says one of the problems is we think because people are intellectuals in an area that makes them smart about every area. In other words, someone who understands thermodynamics might not even understand how to tie a tie. But we think because they're intellectuals and experts on every subject. So you are electing people who think they're experts on every subject, but they only have expertise in a certain area. Individuals are left to trust only themselves as the ultimate knowers of truth and the masters of what is right and wrong. So if it's true to me, it's true. If it's wrong to me, it's wrong. It doesn't really matter what you all think. Because there's no God. See, if you eliminate God, then everybody's left to go what? Yes, ma'am. Oh, yeah.
Like they do like I trust myself, but then I would lean on myself, but that's the problem is themselves.
Well, biblically we understand that.
Yeah.
But the culture doesn't understand that. And there is a brainwashing that is trying to be done in our culture. Christian ethics has God's divine commands as the basis for our determination of the right, the good, and the moral. So we have a standard.
Yes.
The world doesn't have a standard. There used to be a sense of morality that was consistent across the board in our culture. Those days are gone. Way gone. The 60s, the 70s, and the 80s just wiped all that out. There used to be a sense in our country where divorce was wrong. It was shameful. Now we parade it. Adrian Rogers says, the stuff that we used to slinker down the back alley with, we now walk down Main Street with. He comes up with some good stuff. The stuff we used to slinker down the back alley out in the dark, we now throw a spotlight on and parade it down Main Street. That's our culture. There used to be a sense that this was wrong, and it was commonly thought wrong by the culture. That's not true anymore. Relativism and postmodernism destroyed that. Therefore, by objectively following the Lord's judgments, but we have a standard as believers. Therefore, by objectively following the Lord's judgments, humanity is freed from the moral conflicts that arise as a result for our self-centeredness. When we had a sense of the Ten Commandments dominating our culture, we had more and more morality in our culture. When we went away from that, all hell literally breaks loose. And Satan can have a field day. Because now your sin nature can have a field day because there's nothing to regulate it. And if you don't submit to authority, one of the roles of government is to regulate it so it doesn't get out of control. But when you get rid of government, or you get rid of submitting to the authority of government, there's no regulation. So crime can run rampant. Now government makes decisions that justify crime. Prisons become big business. And so you gotta have more crime so you can fill the prisons, so you can make the money at the white collar jobs, because now it's a business, it's not deterring crime. It's a business. Christians believe that God's ethical commands are morally right because they are an overflow of his character. See, that's why Ephesians 5:1 that we read tonight is, be imitators of God as dear children. As God's dear children, we are to reflect the character and the ethics of our Father. But now the church has redefined all this. And stuff we would never allow or accept in the church is now acceptable. Because ain't nobody perfect. We're only human. Ain't nobody doing it all right. We gotta love everybody. And if we're gonna love everybody, we gotta love everything about everybody. And we gotta accept them as they are. I'm telling you, that's the mindset of the church today. Because God's standards don't even apply to his house anymore. And it starts at home. And works its way into the household of God. It starts in the household of God and works its way out to the home. If you got no standards in the church, why do people expect to have people who have standards at home? This is totally different than 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 15. Paul says to Timothy, in case I'm delayed, I write to you that you may know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God. The church is the living God, the pillar and support of the truth. There's a certain way we're supposed to conduct ourselves. And it's not like the world. Because God is loving, honest, holy, trustworthy, and impeccable, he cannot command something that is in violation of his pure and righteous nature. See, this is why you got to dismiss God out of the conversation. This is why you got to preach psychological and sociological messages and stop all that doctrinal teaching and preaching. Because if you keep bringing God in the mix, and we keep seeing how holy he is, I can't keep justifying my unholiness. And I don't come to church to be made feel guilty. I don't come to church to have light shed on my darkness. I come to church because it's a duty, and COVID has totally wiped that out. I come to church because I like some of the people who are there, and I ain't got a lot of friends at work. I come to church because I like to hear a good, motivating message that makes me feel good, but don't expect me to change anything.
So it's best for we not
But it's because we're so influenced by what? The culture. relativism and postmodernism. I don't want any authority in my life, and I don't want truth. I don't want rights and wrongs. I want it loosey-goosey. I want to determine it for myself. I don't want God. Now I'll take Jesus because he might heal me. He might bless me. But I don't want God. Which means you can't have Jesus. But if Jesus is not God, I can have Jesus because in my mind he's not. But he is. But if I change who he is.
I can't talk to these people.
But this is what's happening in the church. You got to understand. This is what's happening. Because there's a lot of preachers on TBN and the Hillsong channel who won't give you God
Very true. Amen.
as he's described in the scriptures.
Amen.
He'll give you a golden calf and call it God.
This makes what the Bible says about evaluating ourselves based on God's standards so important. Because we don't always know how we have been conditioned or influenced.
And are being conditioned.
Amen.
I like with Spurgeon, I like with Calvin. That's why I like reading about these old guys. We just don't really understand how the culture impacts our thinking. And ultimately how Satan is trying to impact our thinking. And we have to stand on the truth. Therefore, those things that he commands are fully in line with his character. Any questions? That's just a synopsis of the chapter, but I think